When 2-year-old Dylan arrived at the shelter, his nose was running and his forehead felt warm to the touch. So his father, Sergio, brought him into this medical van for a checkup. Dr. John Andazola is the volunteer doctor on duty. He checks to make sure Dylan's fever isn't high enough to warrant a trip to the hospital. Sergio and Dylan traveled here from Guatemala. They were detained by federal officials and spent a couple nights in a government holding facility. Sergio thinks that's where his son got sick. He says it was cold inside the facility and agents took away their blankets. He's grateful to be at this shelter now, where he's receiving better treatment. Dozens more patients will pass through the medical van before the night is over. And Andazola, who's been volunteering since 2014, says most children show up with routine colds or mild dehydration. If it weren't for the screenings, things could get dangerous fast.
We would miss the really sick kids. If we miss those kids, they're at risk of serious illness, death.
2 migrant children have died in government custody after being held in New Mexico. Since then, immigration officials have strengthened screenings for minors in custody, and the latest government spending bill allotted an additional $145 million to Customs and Border Protection to provide humanitarian assistance for migrants. That includes $128 million for hiring more medical professionals and $40 million for food, infant formula, and diapers. That's still a small portion of the agency's requested budget, which is more than $18 billion. And that funding doesn't follow migrants once they've been released from custody. Volunteer medics say many families still need medical assistance when they're dropped off at shelters and churches. Frida Adams is the former director of the Office of Border Health, part of the state health department. Now she coordinates volunteer doctors and nurses in southern New Mexico.
The most serious issues we've had is with small children, usually under 2 years old, because they're always the most vulnerable. They're always the most vulnerable to dehydration. They are usually breastfed, and the mothers have not had enough water to maintain their breast milk supply.
Adams says most children can be treated with over-the-counter medications, which volunteers often pay for out of pocket.
My goal is that we never send anybody to the emergency room unless they're absolutely in a bad situation, that we do not burden our already overcrowded emergency room. So what we're doing is actually preventing that from happening for the most part, even when we're in a shortage situation.
Still, Adams says she's learned not to dive straight into medical exams immediately after migrants have been dropped off. She says it's important to let families rest and have something to eat, to provide care beyond basic medicine.
We start handing out water, we start handing out snacks, because the thing they need the most is a place to set their babies down. They've been carrying their babies for 2,000 miles, and even in the holding, many times they hold that child constantly. So to be able to set your child down and rest your arms is a big thing.
The federal government isn't paying for these humanitarian services, but the New Mexico Department of Health is chipping in gas and a driver for the medical van, about $1,000 a month. David Morgan with the department says the state has an obligation to treat everyone in New Mexico.
I certainly understand, how divided we are as a community, as a country about the subject of immigration. But at the end of the day, it's important to us to be able to not lose sight of the fact that these are people, who need help. And this is our role to be able to provide the safety net services to make sure that they are okay before they take off for the next leg of their journey.
Morgan says this medical van is one way the state can meet the growing need along this stretch of the U.S.-Mexico border. For KRWG Public Media, I'm Mallory Falk.